days, Thursday, Friday.
All right. Get started. The Board of Education meeting will now come to order at 6:32. Secretary, please call the roll.
All right. Mellon. Ponce. Rastrelli.
Here.
Becky.
Here.
Wellington here. Gaffey.
Here.
Vote.
Here. Okay, the next thing is citizen comments. Do we have anyone present this evening who wishes to address the board? I don't see anyone in the room. Is there anyone online?
No one with their hand raised.
No one with their hand raised. Okay, so keep moving on. So are there any questions on the consent agenda? Everybody clear, have the time to review it? Okay. I have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Seconded.
Rastrelli.
Yes. Yes.
Vote.
Yes.
Mellon absent. Ponce absent. Becky.
Yes.
Wellington, yes. Gaffey.
Yes.
And this the parcel was first.
Rastrelli.
Thank you.
This gosh, we're going so quick today. I'm not used to this. Okay. The District 120 report.
Yes.
Okay.
First up, the business office on the District 120 report. And Andy, Cyril, you are up to go over the tentative budget for the 21-22 school year.
All right, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Do you guys have the, oh, here we go. All right. You move up to the next slide. This will just be, this is the tentative budget, just so you guys know in terms of the cycle of how this works. You approve the tentative budget tonight. The budget is already on display online, so it can have the 30 days that's required by law. And then at the next board meeting in September, you guys will then have it on the agenda to approve it for the final approval. So those are the steps that have to be taken. So let's get right into it. I'm trying to stay more at the 30,000 foot view for everyone, not get into too many details. So the basic overview is good. So we have a modest operational surplus of about 384,000 at this point. That could change a little bit. There's information that comes in as we get information on various grants and things and how much they're going to be, and that are some of our ESSER grants that will get written later in the year. So there will be some changes as they come down. So, but we are projecting an operational surplus, so that's good. How we got there, the two biggest factors are doing budget reductions and savings, and I'll get into some of that here in just a minute, of about $500,000, and then also a huge influx of federal dollars through the ESSER grants that we're getting. So some of that money is coming in from that we spent last year, but it'll be reimbursed this year, and others that we will spend and get reimbursed in this fiscal year. Next slide. All right, revenues are up about 4.75%, which is a pretty hefty amount for us. But that is due mostly to ESSER, because that's gives us about $1 million plus bump in our budget in dollars. If we didn't have those ESSER funds, we're looking at probably about a 2.2% increase, which is more in line with what we've done in the past. Actually, probably, yeah, in that neighborhood. It just depends on what CPI is typically. Property taxes are up about 700,000, which has been is a pretty good bump for us as of late. But that's the good news. The bad news is our interest income is down sharply, and that's about $500,000 over the last 2 years that we've lost in interest income, simply because of the market, and the market rates have come down, and really most investments are barely above zero at this point, just because of federal policy, monetary policy. And unfortunately, we don't see that changing anytime soon, but we can always hope. But the big bump, as I mentioned before, is the ESSER dollars from the federal government. That's the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds or COVID type of funds. There are 3 different grants that are involved with that. 2 that were, all 3 were passed last year, but a lot of that money will be coming in this year. I'm anticipating that'll probably be about $1 million plus that the district will receive. So that's a nice bump. I mean, and we'll get into some of the things we're going to be spending that on here in just a minute. State funding is about level, and that's actually a win, given the way things have gone at the state. And we've talked about this before, but with state funding, they're also getting a huge amount of money from the federal government to be able to keep their programs and their grants at least level, if not a little bit more. They did put a little bit of money into the EBF this year, the evidence-based funding. And we just got those numbers here this last week, and we got about the same as we've gotten in the past. We'll get about $63,000 more than we would have gotten otherwise. But it's not a ton of money, but it's better than just staying level. So we're thankful for that. Next slide. Expenditures are up about 2.5% over last year. That is a combination of ESSER spending that we're doing that we wouldn't have done otherwise if we didn't get those grants. And also just an increase from a COVID, what I call a COVID level budget. And that was kind of a depressed budget last year. We didn't spend as much in many areas that we normally would have, just because we're in a remote learning environment. I mean, some areas we did spend more actually, but we did spend less in some substantial areas, such as transportation was probably our biggest savings right there last year. But those amounts are going to come back up this year because we're going to be in a normal situation. Hopefully that'll be it for the rest, this year. We won't have a shutdown. So anticipating that we're going to have a normal year, that means that those expenditures where we had savings last year are going to come up to more normal levels or even above. So that accounts for that 2.5% increase. If we hadn't had, I guess if I said if we had a normal year and didn't have ESSER, we'd probably be barely having an increase in expenditures just because of the budget reductions we've made over the last couple of years. So those increases are in for those two major reasons. And as I mentioned before, we had about $500,000 in budget reductions and savings. That includes some attrition for positions. It includes a lot of cuts in supply and equipment budgets. We've trimmed those about as much as we can. And it also, a good news piece is we got about $150,000 in savings on health and dental premiums. So really, really excellent renewal this year. And in essence, we actually had some premiums go down. And the way I came up with that $150,000 savings is I had originally anticipated that we'd be probably more around what they call trend, which would be about 5% increase. So that's where that $150,000 savings on health insurance came through. That was a nice blessing this year. Next slide. I just want to get in real briefly on some of the higher level pieces that we're going to be spending ESSER grant dollars on. We spent a lot last year on just equipment, those R0 machines. We bought a lot of signage, retrofitted bathrooms, those sorts of things. We'll continue to do some of those things. We're going to have to get some new signage. We'll always continue to have PPE and those sorts of things. So that will continue to spend those kind of dollars, ESSER dollars, on those sorts of things. But some of the things that we'll spend additional on that we wouldn't have otherwise is intervention teachers and instructional assistants. And those are for people, those are hires to help address what they call learning loss. Some of our at-risk kids that may have fallen behind in the last year with COVID. These ESSER grants give us the ability to hire those folks and to be able to give interventions to students who need that assistance this year. So that's a huge benefit to these ESSER grants. Again, last year we spent a ton of money also on technology. everything from laptops to improved infrastructure, software as well. Canvas, you're probably all aware of. Those are all things we've spent money on, and we'll continue to spend money on technology so we can continue to have a flexible learning environment in case we do have any issues this year where there may be shutdowns or we have to go to a partial hybrid. Hopefully we won't have to do that, but we will be making some technology expenditures that will be covered under those ESSER grants. We also did some enhanced summer school this year, and I anticipate we'll also do some next year. We also hired a special summer school principal to analyze some of the data for some of our students that have been falling behind. So that was some of the pieces that we also used to address learning loss from COVID and remote learning from last year. So those are some of the big areas that we'll be spending ESSER grant money on. Part of one of the nice things about especially the last 2 iterations of ESSER grants is that we can spread those dollars out over a couple of years. So we do anticipate that we'll spend some this year. We'll spend some of that ESSER money again next year because we have quite a bit of money there, and we don't have to spend it all in one year, which is also a nice aspect of it. And so that's it for my higher view of the budget. It's overall good news because we do have a surplus budget. And so that's a huge plus. I will be giving you a much more complete full report like I always do in writing that you'll get in your board packet for September. But this gives you the high level view of the budget at this point. Are there any questions?
Andy, I was just curious, the edit to the personnel report that we got today with a couple more, there was one last week, there was a hire and then an added hire today. Are those hires that are a result of this or just coincidental?
I'm not sure. I didn't see the personnel reports. I believe you guys already approved the 2 teachers, if I'm not mistaken. I think Stacy might know the answer to that question. But I believe the teacher hires have already been made. I don't know about instructional assistants though.
One of the hires was for a recent resignation.
Okay, that's because I saw the resignation in the hire, so that's what I figured. And then I saw that the new hire today, the 1-to-1. So I was just wondering if that was a result of this.
Andy, do you know if the ESSER funds are based off of the school years that were already affected by COVID? And
Yeah, you can, with the ESSER funds, the way they're stated, you can go back and claim funds that were from the beginning of the pandemic. I'm getting your question correctly, but yeah, it covers all the pandemic back to March of 2020, and then goes forward all the way. You can, if you want to, you can spread it all the way to 2024. At least the last 2 ESSERs. The first one has to be spent by this September, but the other 2, which were the much larger sums of money, which is about $2 million, can be spent over the next couple of years.
getting at is if they go back, do they also account for what we're seeing going forward, or is there a possibility that we'll see those come through again?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something that they'll have to address at this point. But the way they've set them up is that you can spread those dollars out over several years. So for the last 2 grants, about $2 million worth, you could go all the way through September of 2024 to spend those dollars, or have them at least in the pipeline to be spent. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Okay.
Up next, human resources. Shane's gonna go over the job descriptions for those
Yes.
positions that we did approve last Tuesday.
Right, so in an effort to reshape the structure of the technology department to be a little bit more nimble and better serve the students and staff, Dan Crow has put in 3 different job titles. It's a a rearrangement of duties. It's going to start off with a technology support supervisor, and then a technology support specialist level 2, and then a technology support specialist level 1. I am going to completely defer to Dan on all of the technical requirements in terms of certifications and necessities needed for computer stuff. But attached in the board packet were the 3 job descriptions that would serve both District 120 and District 75.
Same, were those new positions hired or reallocating current personnel?
Reallocating current personnel.
Up next then, under the superintendent's report, the academic topic for this month, and purpose it's the main one, is to be able to have a deeper conversation. Stacy Gorman and her team are going to present an update on the equity initiative that's been taking place in District 120 for a number of years. And you'll hear how this is also aligning with the board policy that you had approved. Counselor Lake, Stacy, hand it off to you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We are very, very excited to share some of the highlights of our equity work in really the last 4 years, but there's some things that we're going to specifically talk about that we've done in the last 2 years. I am honored to represent a lot of work from many, many people who couldn't be here tonight to stand in front of you and share all the things that they have been involved in. I am very, very, I feel very blessed to work with this particular team. Andy Hirschman is a part of our steering committee for the Equity Action Committee, and unfortunately, due to a family emergency, he's unable to be here tonight. I do want to give a shout out to him because he's been a trailblazer in this work, and as challenging as it's been, he has persevered with us. So I would like the steering committee to introduce themselves, and then we can kick off with the presentation.
Melissa Sethna, I'm an instructional coach at Manila.
Good evening, everyone. Soka Bachwala, Equity and Community Coordinator.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Billetier. I'm a teacher and case manager in the Transition Center.
And a District 75 board member.
And a district secretary.
And Sol is a trustee. And Melissa is a parent and her husband works on the line as well.
Very invested.
Yes, yes, all of them. I love it. Okay, so I love this quote. I was looking through some of our old slide decks, and we used this quote in actually April of 2018. And I remember standing up in front of the staff. So 2018 was the first time we were going to kind of introduce this or roll out our equity work. And I thought I was going to have a little bit of a breakdown. And I remember we'd invited a parent of color to present about her experiences in being a Black woman in predominantly white school and living in a predominantly Black community. And I remember talking to her, I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I think this is a bad idea. They're going to get really mad. And she said, this work requires bravery and courage and persistence and resilience. And if you all don't do it, who's going to do it? And so you're going to have to just jump in. So I really refer back to this quote because that is one of the things I think that we all have learned is sometimes you're not going to be the most popular person in the room, but that's okay because this is the kind of work that we need to do to give our students and our families the best educational experience possible. The other thing that you're going to see as we kind of go along and share some of the work we've done. This is the board policy. And the thing about board policies that's really interesting is a lot of times people don't read them. Sometimes they're in a binder that has dust on it. Now we move digitally. So now they're like online, no one reads it. The thing that's really cool about this policy is one, you're incredibly progressive, the trailblazers, right? And this kind of work at the board level. Two, our staff feels really supported in having those kinds of courageous conversations in their classrooms. But three, these things that you committed to, they're actually being implemented in our school. And I think that's awesome. So this is not just a policy that's put over on a shelf somewhere. This is a real living document that is being carried out. So thank you again to you. All right, so one of the things that we have really focused on in the last 4 years is how there are multiple aspects of equity work within a district. So I have been focused on academics. That's been my job, for a long time as a department chair and in my current roles. But what I have come to realize, and I realize this as a teacher, what I've come to realize is that the academics doesn't work without all these other things. So students don't necessarily learn in the classroom unless there is community and they have relationships and there's a positive school culture where they feel valued and seen and included. The academics also don't work when we don't have partnerships with our parents, when there's a power dynamic between the teacher and the family. What we're working on, and Sol and Eric have been really instrumental in this, is how can we partner with our families? So I don't know if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, but I did this. I made a lot of mistakes when I was a teacher and kind of figuring things out. But I would call home and say, your child hasn't done their work and they need to get some work done. And the parent would say, well, how should I, what should I do? What steps? I said, well, it's probably the information flyer in the backpack. So just go through their papers and find it. That is not a partnership, right? That is not actually including parents in that dialogue. So that is one thing. Again, these all kind of work together to make a more equitable school district. So at this time, Melissa's gonna share some of the action steps that a group called the Equity Action Committee has been working on.
Yep. So as Stacy said, we've had equity committees in the school in the past. We've had it where it's been run by administration and then staff have been chosen to be on those committees. And we were doing that for a while. And we had a lot of teachers and staff members express interest in being involved. And when we were doing these committees during the school day, we just didn't have enough subs to do it. And so we, as the steering committee, kind of decided that we wanted to do more of a grassroots approach and reach out to the staff and, and last year ended up working out really well because we had the late start. And we were able to use Friday mornings during the late start to meet every other week with our whole committee. And Anna, actually, if you'll flip to the next slide, because that actually has some more information. We ended up having about 50 staff members who were involved in those meetings, and not everyone every time, but there was a huge commitment from our staff to get involved and all different roles. So it wasn't just teachers. I mean, there were administrators that were there, IAs, secretaries, security, Sol was all of us, there were so many people that were involved. It was really great to get different perspectives from different people in the building. And then some of our subcommittees, which I'll talk about in just a second, how that started, but they met outside of our large group meetings. So they were meeting on the off weeks with their smaller groups and continuing to do the work that they set out to do. And our goal on this committee was, we always said the Beyond the Book Club is more of this idea that we were tired of just reading books. You can read a lot of books, but if you're not actually doing the work, what's the point of reading the book? So our goal was really to get people doing the work. And these staff members were truly excited to do the work. So that's kind of how it all started. And then, so here's what happened. So in our first meeting, we asked the staff that were there, we were like, okay, you guys, what topics do you want to discuss? What should we be doing in this group? And so they ended up brainstorming all of these things on a Jamboard. And then from there, we put them into smaller groups and we said, okay, now what themes do you see? What are some common ideas? And from that, we ended up coming up with 6 subcommittees. And so that's what we're going to end up talking to you kind of about today, is what are the actions that those 6 subcommittees have been taking throughout this last year. So, Anna, next slide.
Okay, academics. So honestly, a lot of this work for this particular subcommittee was facilitated by Andy Hirschman and Melissa. I'm going to talk a little bit about grading, and then I'll give you an overview of where we're heading with earned honors. So those are a couple of things that we are working on. you know, at grading, we've been working on now for 2.5 years, and we do have a phased rollout, but we are phasing out part 2 of our equitable grading practices. One of the things that we looked at, and honestly had never thought about kind of that concept of equity in grading. So Joe Feldman, he has some articles out if, you know, the book is kind of dense. We did read it as a leadership team, and many people who are on our equity committee also read it. And one of the things that he really proposes, and these are the policies that we created to address these things, is this concept of how we're grading students. And so most educators are really good at school, particularly teachers. That's why they spend their whole life in a school, in a classroom. And many of us have an idea of what a good student looks like, what they do, right? They sit, they raise their hand, they do their work, and they don't say anything unless they're called on. And so there's a lot of bias in that, right? Because honestly, that is very much a white perspective of what a good student looks like. So one of the practices we looked at is grading on participation. This is just an example. I promise the grading is a whole nother board meeting. So that can be an academic topic that we talk about later. But there's a couple of examples I want to give you about grading policies that we found to be inequitable. So participation. In some classes, participation was a bigger chunk of the grade. And when you look at participation, how is that evaluated? Like, you know, you raise your hand a lot, Lisa, and Peter, you don't say much. And so I'm going to give you an A in participation, you're going to get a C. And one of the things that we were discovering is participation looks really different for different students. Their lived experiences, their cultural backgrounds, those kinds of things. We were at a conference, and I may or may not have shared this with you, but I think it's pertinent to what we're doing with our grading for equity. So I was at a conference, and he was a Black presenter, and he said, I want to give you a situation that we're seeing in terms of grading and participation. So a Black child goes to a predominantly Black church on Sunday. And in predominantly Black churches, and he was saying, you have to call out. And if you're not calling out, the preachers sometimes, can I get an amen? Right? So they want that feedback from you. They want to call out. Monday morning, the child goes to school. He's great on participation, the right kind of participation, where he's supposed to raise his hand and stay in the seat. And he's calling out. And he's not getting those points, right? Because he's not doing it, he's not participating as the teacher would like to be participating. Another example is extra credit. So a lot of times, and I did this, you get extra credit for going to a historical movie, for example, or I sent them to a play. And you think about equity with that, and it's included in the grade, right? Transportation, money, some kids have to work. And so students who don't have those barriers can go to the movie or whatever, and they get the extra credit. But the other students who have barriers don't get that extra credit. So those are some of the things that we started to think about. Earned honors, I've presented a lot about earned honors in world studies. I'm really excited to announce that English, biology, and Algebra 1, so those are other freshman core classes, will be going to earned honors in August of 2022. You all may get some pushback on this, but what's really important is that it is kind of dismantling that idea of these are the smart kids and these are not so smart kids. And we have lower expectations for these kids and higher expectations for these kids, right? All our kids are bright. All of our kids have academic strengths. And this model brings all that out. So all our kids have high expectations and are receiving a rigorous education. This is something I couldn't have done on my own. So Melissa and Andy organized meetings with our course team leaders for these teams. They held Zoom sessions where people could kind of come and check out earned honors, and we answered questions and those kinds of things. And then they all decide on their own. This was not a mandate. And I think that's really important. And that represents the kind of grassroots equity work that's going on in our building now. So it's not administration telling them you have to do this. It's them saying we want this because it's better for kids.
Okay. So one of the other groups was Courageous Conversations. And in this group, they were really focused on providing resources and supports for staff if they were interested in having a conversation with a colleague or having a conversation in class with students. So in the past, we had done student panels. So before this whole committee started, you know, we had organized student panels where students would come and they would share their experiences and staff would get to hear. There wasn't a lot of like conversations happening, but it was more of like share, listen kind of thing. And so our goal really now is to have those discussions that are happening in class when they need to happen in class. You know, when something happens out in the world and we need to make sure that they're having appropriate conversations, then they're looking at both sides and talking about things, and doing it in an appropriate way. So it's not offensive to anyone. In the group, there were a few of the leaders of the group that actually held a training for the department chairs, right? Like part of the MHS leadership. So that was kind of cool. And then they also ended up having a training for the staff as part of our professional development days. And then they also created a website and a resource document for teachers and staff to go to that has all sorts of information on that we try to refer back to as we like send out information. Like, don't forget, you can go to here if you need help, you can reach out to these people. They will come to your classroom, they will talk, you know, they will help you like guide you through the discussion. So if you're uncomfortable with it, they're trying to make it more comfortable for staff to be willing to try to talk to one another about this stuff.
They had some really good opportunities. I shouldn't call it a good opportunity, but they had opportunities to engage in these conversations this year. And what I was really proud of is that we had members of the Equity Action Committee come together to make sure that we were, and we, you know, we've kind of developed these resources over time when we think about the election. So we had teachers who got together because we didn't know how it was going to go. And in 2016, we could have been better prepared. And so we came together to talk about how would you discuss this with students in class? They have a lot of questions. How would we answer them? The instruction in January, that was one that we couldn't just go on teaching circles or tangents or whatever in math, right? Or the osmosis, process of osmosis in science. It needed to be addressed. Kids wanted to engage. And what I love is, as you can imagine, sometimes we get a few questions of, well, why are you talking about the instruction in math class? Well, it's a little bit more important at this moment than parallel lines. But one of the things that's been amazing with the policy is that it supports this work. So we're able to say, in all aspects of our district, we are committed to this. And so that is something that we've really been focused on, is starting to have these conversations. But it is tough sometimes because, as you can imagine, not all our families are entirely comfortable with the conversation because our students may or may not be having those discussions at home. But bottom line here, and what I love about this group, conversations for compassion, right? When you think about our country and our world, that's what we're after, right? To be compassionate and kind to one another and inclusive. And so that's all we're asking, you know, from our teachers and our students to have those conversations.
Okay, so one of the other groups was the restorative justice group. And I know that there was a presentation to you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy, like about the whole restorative restart that they're doing this year. That actually came out of this group. So they spent a lot of time this year researching what does restorative justice mean? Because for a lot of people, it really started off as like this discipline thing. And how do we change how discipline is done in the building? And really what it ended up being is the restorative practices. So that's kind of where our restorative restart kind of began. And it began through this group. So they believe that the work goes beyond just the discipline, and they presented this stuff to you, and they will be presenting it to the staff tomorrow. So. There you go.
Oh yeah.
I'm like,
so they are working on, they will be working specifically on restorative justice. And the thing is, Melissa was saying, restorative justice, you think of like the dean's office and suspension and those kinds of things. It's absolutely a part of restorative justice, But one of the things that we're focused on with our equity work is how can we get past this? So a lot of times, you know, you do something wrong, you get a detention, you get out of school suspension, you get in a conflict with the teacher. How can we prevent it from getting to the dean's office, right? So let's start back in the classroom. Our teachers have so much of an impact on how things go, right, with students. And it's that creating that supportive environment and creating that sense of student self-respect and kind of that mutual relationship of respect. And so we'll be focused a lot on what strategies could we use to be here, to restore relationships between teachers and students when things maybe get a little bit rough. So I think right there, we're gonna pause for a minute. Melissa and I have kind of done our section. So do you have questions about what we presented before we move on to community equity?
So you talked about students may not be having these conversations at home, and they're not always easy conversations to have, but regardless. Do you anticipate like how you'll help with parents who come in and say, you know, this isn't what we want you to be talking about in the classroom, or how to address a parent's concern?
Yeah, so actually we've had a lot of support from our esteemed leaders in the back. Both Shane and Kevin have really put together some nice talking points that we are actually sharing with our leadership team, particularly department chairs who are more in the trenches a little bit. One of the things that, you know, I've been listening to some school board meetings, particularly in my community of Barrington. And one of the things that's coming up is critical race theory. I think that there's a misunderstanding of that, and that's some of the pushback that I think other communities are getting. Honestly, it's been very minimal here, which is awesome because it shows that our community is pretty accepting and wants to, you know, be looking at these issues. But the thing about critical race theory is, don't we want our students to be critical consumers of information? Don't we want them to engage in critical thinking? And race, of course, is a part of that, but there's all different kinds of equity-related topics in terms of students with disabilities, LGBTQIA+, you know, those are all things that we're looking at. And we teach about race. Yes, that is a part of our country's history. And so I think one of the things we're just focusing on is, again, those kind of conversations for compassion, and that we teach all of our students how to think critically, right? And I do want some talking points so we can be consistent in our message, though, when parents have questions about that, because it is tricky.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to turn over to Sol and Eric, who are going to talk about our community work.
And I'm actually going to do the next slide first. Can you please go to the next one, accessibility? Thank you so much. Okay, our accessibility subgroup was focused on breaking down and removing barriers to both education and extracurricular activities. So to get started, they did a needs assessment by asking the question, what barriers to education and extracurricular activities are students currently facing? So on their own, they identified financial, communication, and transportation barriers. These are barriers that they identified as impacting students currently. And now this list here is a great example of how some of those barriers are starting to be broken down. We're starting to break down financial barriers by seeking out and connecting students with more opportunities for scholarships. This summer, we had a basketball coach offer a free sports camp for athletes and students. We're increasing our translation services to break down communication barriers, whether it's materials being distributed throughout the building, signage in the building, as well as audio technology that allows people to hear presentations translated. We're welcoming more students and families in that way. And in the future, we're hoping to break down some of those transportation barriers by increasing transportation for summer camps and athletics, as well as after school. And now can you go to the previous slide, please? Thank you, Anna. So the work in the previous subcommittee was really driven firsthand by the educators in the building. What's really cool when we look at the welcoming environment is we start to see what happens when we involve students in that work alongside the staff. And so the Welcoming Environment Committee is focused on ensuring that all students feel welcome and heard in their school community. So this work began with the question, how do our students see themselves represented in their school community? This started by gathering information directly from students to learn more about how they were feeling in their school community, then taking that info and making sure the students feel heard by inviting them to the table and giving them a voice in what we're doing here in the school. Last year, we had a student panel work collaboratively with this Board of Education to write an equity policy. And it's incredible to think that we have our Board of Education and our students in the building working alongside each other. I kind of get goosebumps when I say that. It was when I was practicing it too. You know, to take that a step further, we've got student panels meeting with teachers and administrators to talk about the way they feel in the curriculum, how they see themselves being represented. And, you know, we've started to address concerns with students who may feel marginalized or underrepresented in that curriculum. And we're having conversations alongside the students and administrators. This is really cool because what we start to do here is rather than have this hierarchy of authority or power, we're really starting to promote this linear collaboration amongst educators and students in the building. That's all I have from my subcommittees here. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I always say I get the fun stuff. So my first is family outreach. And as we know, students do way better at school if there's parent involvement, right? So how do we do that? To me, that means going out into our community, hanging out in their neighborhoods, giving them information that they need, really being with them and understanding what their needs are, right? To achieve this, we planned a few events like community coffees at home and the bus stop outreach. So the community coffees at home took place at families' homes. There was a small gathering. Well, I don't even know if we would call it a small gathering because sometimes it turned out to a big cookout. We'd be sitting with the families. We would bring forward different information like important events, important dates. We would talk about AP honor classes. We would talk about parent-teacher conferences and just really sit and listen to their concerns. The bus stop outreach was a really fun way to reach out to our community. We would go out to the elementary and middle school bus stops with a bunch of MHS swag. We would give out cocoa and conchitas in the fall, and we would give out ice cups in the summer. Another cool way that we're doing this is outreach to feeder schools, which is instrumental in building the relationships with their families. So currently, we meet on a monthly basis with representatives from District 73, 75, and 76. We also have a parent leadership group who we meet with as well on these monthly meetings, and they give us information or we take requests from them for speakers or events. A big event was the BPEC Summit, which was in January of 2020. And there was a super cool summit where it was about 75 parents that came on a Saturday morning for 4 hours, and we offered different workshops, such as mental health, immigration, and resilience and perseverance. The topics that were chosen were based off of the feedback that we received from parents. We also offer a variety of resource panels. During COVID, we offered a COVID Q&A and a mental health workshop, both presented by Mano Mano. Prior to that, we offered a community forum on the topic of immigration, where experts from different branches of government, such as the Mexican consulate, the Lake County Sheriff, we had our Mundelein Police Chief, our mayor, and an immigration attorney was present to address any questions or concerns from our community. Through conversations and surveys, we learned that these are the topics that are most important to our families. And it's super important that we provide that safe space for them to have that conversation. And in return, we're also getting a deeper understanding of what their needs are. Any questions on this one?
I just want to brag on her for 1 minute. So, through the equity audit, which I'll talk about at the end, we're gonna, there'll be lots of measurements, those kinds of things. And what we have found since Sol has been here is we've nearly doubled the participation of our Spanish-speaking families on things like community events at our school and particularly survey feedback. So one of the things, and it seems so simple, we just didn't do it, is Sol she sends a text out to all our Spanish-speaking families with links to stuff. So if not an email, a text, which is actually even better for me because I don't look at my personal email all that much. And it's simple things like that that's leading to so much more engagement with our families. And honestly, the main office, so she and I'll give a shout out to Joanna Rodriguez, so many families coming in, and it's a constant flow, and it is awesome to see the confidence in coming in and knowing that there are going to be people here who support them and are going to help them with whatever they need. So she has been an amazing, had amazing impact on our school community.
That was awesome. Like really awesome. And I mean, the text is awesome, but I'm guessing it's because of the personal touch.
Yes.
And then once you have coffee with one family, oh, she's okay, you can talk to her, you can go to school and talk to her, even if everyone else is scary, you're not, and it's gonna, a neighbor tells the little brother of the other person, and then word spread, so.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, well, that's because of you.
Sometimes they'll come into the building and say, I was told you would help me.
Yes.
Or they would go to Joanna and want to specifically talk with Joanna, just because of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good job.
Thank
And
you.
even last night, we had incoming freshman kind of parent night, where transfer students, just where's my locker, my PE uniform, that kind of thing. They had over 100 Spanish speaking families. They had to get more chairs to set up. So again, such a tribute to you and, all the other people that you work with as well. But I'm really very impressed and proud of that work.
Any more questions? We're gonna move on to community outreach, okay? So we've done, as you've probably seen on Facebook or social media or all over Mundelein, we've done a variety of food distributions, school supply distributions for our families, in collaboration with outside organizations as well, such as the chapel. They've been instrumental in everything that we do. COVID did not stop us. If anything, it made us work harder. We consistently invited 250 families to each event. During COVID, at one point, we served 500 families at a food distribution. Then we also offer annual health and resource fair. We just had the fair on June 9th and June 10th. We offered 2 dates this summer. Very successful. All appointments were filled. We know that doctor's offices are saturated and kids need to turn in their physicals and their vaccines. So we're gonna offer another one on October 22nd. Mundelein Latino Police Academy, super important group that we work with. They are part of the Mundelein Police Department. It's a group of community members that meets 2 sessions, one in the spring, one in the fall. They meet for 10-week sessions and they talk about different topics related to police work or just outside community resources that they may need. Now, this group is super important because many of our parents attend this group or they have graduated from this group. So in the partnership with them, we're able to go to their meetings and hand out information. If there's parent-teacher conferences, if they need specific help on something, this is where we go. Another event that we attended was Strides for Peace, the 5K, and Stronger Together, both hosted by our Black Student Union. We also recently, a group of EAC members recently participated in Mundelein's 4th of July parade. That was the very first one, is that right? It was very fun. And then we have future events like Nuestras Fiestas Patrias. which will be held at Village Hall, September 3rd through the 6th. It's a celebration of Mexican and Central American Independence Days. We will represent our schools, and our feeder schools will also be there to help celebrate with our community. When I think about equity, I also think about mitigative versus transformative. We've done all of these food drives. We have met a lot of basic needs, or helped meet a lot of basic needs for families. But what can we really do to really up that, right? What can we really do to really help families advocate for their children? So I think we will achieve this through UDP sessions or VPAC sessions. And the focus will be empowerment and leadership. I'd love to give the families the tools that they need to really know and believe that they can also be leaders in their home and in their community. So we will see this transformation when we see more families at our events, when we see more parents at parent-teacher conferences, or when we see more people of different walks of life at our board meetings. So that's one of the focuses that we would like for our UDP and VPAC sessions for this year. Another example of this, a great example of this, is Veronica Villaseñor. She is a rock star volunteer, but most importantly, she advocated fiercely for her 3 children that graduated through MHS. She just recently received the Those Who Excel Award from ISB. So she's a great example of a parent that started in elementary school and then went through high school with her kids and just was in her office all the time, asking questions for her kids. And that's exactly what we want to see. Any questions of this part?
So I think I've known you for about 5 years. And seeing all of this listed is pretty impressive. And it makes me go back to think about where all your fingerprints were throughout those 5 years. Some of these things we worked together on, I think, even in other parts, you just knew you were going to see Soul there when you weren't involved directly. What's interesting to me is where things were 5 or 6 years ago, where things are now, and where things are going. And you obviously got plans for the future. Given COVID and given the challenges that our community faces, have you found ways that